Hi, this is the Compass Podcast, where we connect the divine to the everyday. My name is Ryan Dunn.
And I'm Michelle Maldonado.
And we are connecting the divine to everyday things like technology, specifically artificial intelligence. Ooh. Michelle, this may be like a short question with a long, detailed answer, so we'll just try to sum this up as best we can. But how have you used AI so far?
So I've given it several shots, both personally and professionally. I'll start professionally. I just wanted to see what it could do. So I've asked questions like generate goals for my job to see if it could. It could, which was really freaky since it doesn't exactly know what I do.
Right? Yeah. Maybe it could tell the rest of, like sometimes people ask us what our job descriptions are and we're a little bit like, yeah. So could it define that for you?
It almost could. I had to do minimal editing, which really freaked me out. Like how does it know? And personally, I've used it, a couple of friends who aren't very tech savvy have asked me like, hey, I need a cover letter or I need, a summary of a book, things like that. So I generate it for them. And the cover letter one really let me know what this thing is capable of, because all I told it was a very vague description. And I think they wanted a position at the university. So I typed in the university, and it was so specific to that job role because I guess it just pulled the job link.
Okay.
And it was very, very specific, and it was awesome. I was like, ooh, I need to file this in the memory bank.
Like in an unsettling way? Like, oh, it knows too much? Or
Yes.
Were you intimidated in that regard? Okay.
It knows too much. Like I'm fascinated by technology, but I keep finding myself when I'm in front of it and I see its capabilities, I kind of like shy away. Like this is too much. But maybe it's because we've all seen the movies and it's part of pop culture to fear the AI and the robots. So I'm trying to keep that in check too.
Yeah. I found it useful as like a jumping off point for a lot of things, but I've been a little slow to really adapt it full on word for word in what it's often provided. And we're going to get into that a little bit. In this episode, actually, we're going to explore how AI can or cannot help us on our spiritual journeys and really help us to like inform our own spiritual or Christian practice. And so we're going to hear from a pastor whose church has kind of gone through a few processes with AI. Hear some warnings from other Christian practitioners about what AI can and cannot do. But I wanted to start off this episode in exploring the possibilities and limitations of AI by letting AI just run wild on this thing. And specifically, I wanted it to make my life easy and provide a podcast script. So it has done that. And in this case, it has done it without any editing at all, Michelle. So we're going to roll into this thing. I asked it specifically for a 2-person podcast script relating AI to the practice of Christian spirituality. And this is what it turns out. And I do have to note, this was fascinating to me. So I tried several different AI content producing platforms, and I gave them all the same prompt. They all turned out the exact same thing. So I think what's going on there is that we have these engines that are built on top of the same platform, which is probably ChatGPT, and they're just finding other ways to implement that for something specific. So actually, I think what we're using here is the script that specifically came out of ChatGPT. So let's roll into it. This is AI produced Compass Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Compass Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dunn, and today we'll be diving into the fascinating topic of artificial intelligence in Christian spirituality. In this episode, We'll explore how AI intersects with religious beliefs, its potential impact on Christian practices, and the ethical considerations surrounding its development. Joining us today is Michelle Maldonado, an expert in theology and technology. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
To get us started, could you provide us with an overview of what artificial intelligence actually is?
Skynet. No, I'm just kidding. That's me. Absolutely. Artificial intelligence, or AI, refers to the development of computer systems that can perform tasks typically requiring human intelligence. These systems are designed to analyze data, make decisions, learn from experience, and even interact with humans in the way that's reminiscent of human conversation.
That's impressive. Now, I feel like we should have backed up, like I should have introduced you as Dr. Michelle Maldonado. I mean, even though your doctorate is not in that specific topic, still, as long as we're platforming you as the expert here, Dr. Michelle Maldonado, how does AI intersect with Christian spirituality? Are there any particular areas where these two realms come together?
Indeed, there are several points of intersection. One such area is the use of AI in religious practices. For example, we've seen chatbots programmed with religious knowledge that can answer theological questions or provide spiritual advice. Ooh, that's weird. Additionally, AI can assist in studying religious text and even generate sermons or prayers based on patterns and themes found within these texts.
So a little tangent here from our AI-produced script. This is where human creativity comes in that you just can't replace, I think. Because one of the things that you mentioned in there, Michelle, was that there are chatbots programmed with religious knowledge that can answer theological questions. One of the very popular ones is on Twitch right now. It's just called Ask Jesus, Ask_Jesus. And it is kind of cool in that you have this AI portraying the part of Jesus and you can ask it questions. And some of the questions are just meant to be silly or funny, or they're trying to trip up the algorithm in the AI a little bit. So people ask it for help with homework or to retell a biblical story with silly names. And one of the amazing things, though, that I find about Jesus reacting to those things is that AI Jesus, hopefully like real Jesus, never runs out of patience. Like, you always get a legit answer from AI Jesus. It's never just like, your question is stupid and I'm not going to answer that. But it also always kind of pivots to make some kind of point about a spiritual truth. So I have a clip for us to consider on that, where somebody's asking it just kind of an off-the-wall question, and you can listen for the way that it makes the Jesus juke here. And we do kind of have to get on beyond, if you're watching the video, like the representation of Jesus. Michelle, you mentioned that
he's paler than me.
yeah, maybe not the most accurate.
Jesus, what is the best food for the human body? Hello, Metallica 29. It's great to see your curiosity about health. The best foods for the human body are usually those that are natural, like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins. It's also important to remember that balance and moderation in all things are crucial. Consider a rich variety of foods, abundant in nutrients, fiber, and good fats. But perhaps equally important is our spiritual sustenance, feeding our hearts and minds with love, kindness, and positive thoughts. Have a blessed day.
It made it such a creative turn, though, right?
Yeah, that's really creative.
Hey, not only do you need to feed your body, but here comes the Jesus juke, you have to feed your spirit as well. So I was playing around with some of these other AI Jesus representations. There's an app where you can text Jesus, and I did a little bit of that. And this is where I feel like it's important to bring up a warning about what these apps are capable of. So we just saw something that's kind of impressive in the way that it is creative in taking probably an out of context and silly question and making a spiritual turn to it. But also, sometimes the information that it provides, it sounds authoritative, but it can be a little incomplete. So I used a Text with Jesus app, and I asked it a question. I said, a lady on the street stopped me and asked for money. How much should I give her? And Jesus came back and said, it's wonderful that you're considering helping someone in need. In situations like this, it's important to be compassionate and generous. In the Bible, I taught about caring for the poor and those less fortunate. One particular verse that comes to mind is Matthew 5:42, where I said, give to the one who asks you and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. While there isn't a specific amount mentioned in this verse, it emphasizes the spirit of giving with a willing heart. I encourage you to consider your means and give what you can without causing financial strain on yourself. Remember, it's not about the exact amount, but rather the love and compassion behind your gesture. May God bless your generosity. Star emoji. So that looks cool, right, Michelle? I mean, kind of.
That's a decent answer.
Yeah, I found sound advice. However, the scripture that it references is pulled out of context. So I see that lesson in Matthew 5 as a way of overcoming evil and greed. And it's not really so much about lending a helping hand. I think that Matthew 5 speaks to overcoming evil with goodness and love. So it's specifically talking about somebody who's suing you and responding to that suit. It's not really, I don't know, in this case, in that Matthew 5 case, Matthew 5:42, about generosity for the poor or downtrodden. So some
Brownie
caveats
points.
there.
Yeah. And brownie points for Jesus using emojis.
Yeah, right? Yes. It is striking, though, when it refers to itself in the first person. Yeah. I mean, like in an unsettling way. Like I had a hard time actually saying that. So I don't hear it. So that's fun, playing around with Ask Jesus apps, and we'll link to those on the show notes page. You can explore those yourself. Right? Michelle, shall we continue on with our AI-generated script?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, I think it's my turn here. That's interesting. Oh, wait. Yes, okay,
Yeah,
that's where we are. Yeah, that's interesting. However, there might be concerns among Christians about the role of AI in religious activities. What are some potential and ethical considerations that arise in this context?
Absolutely. Ethical considerations are crucial to address. One key concern is the potential devaluation of human interaction and experience. While AI can offer guidance, it cannot truly replace the role of personal relationships, community, and spiritual connection between humans and God. It's important to strike a balance between utilizing AI tools and maintaining the fundamental aspects of Christian spirituality.
That's a valid point. I mean, for real, that's a valid point. Now, looking at a broader perspective, we know that AI has the potential to disrupt various industries and create significant societal changes. How might this affect Christian beliefs and practices?
Well, AI advancements can amplify Christian outreach, allowing messages of love, compassion, and faith to reach wider audiences through platforms like social media and online communities. However, there's also the risk of AI being programmed with biases or distorted religious content, which could impact the understanding and interpretation of Christian teachings. Additionally, the integration of AI into worship services or rituals must be done thoughtfully, ensuring it doesn't overshadow the core element of Christian spirituality.
We're going to hear all about that shortly with our friend Jay Cooper, but first we'll continue with our AI-generated script. Absolutely. Finding that balance is crucial. As we conclude this conversation, what advice would you give to our listeners who may be grappling with the implications of AI on their Christian beliefs?
I would advise listeners to approach AI with a critical mindset, evaluating its potential benefits and dangers in light of their own spiritual understanding, keeping an open dialogue within their faith communities and seeking guidance from religious leaders can provide valuable insight. Ultimately, Christians should remember that while AI may offer tools for knowledge and guidance, the essence of Christian spirituality lies in personal relationships, stewardship, and living out the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado, for shedding light on this thought-provoking topic. It's been a pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you, Ryan, for the opportunity. I enjoy our conversation and hope it sparks further discussion among your listeners.
Man, I want a little more feeling when you say I enjoyed our conversation.
I was trying to be an AI.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, just playing the part, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, we did want to see how this played out in Christian community, specifically what the AI script just brought up about putting AI into practice in the context of worship services and how it relates to ritual and even some of the theological aspects. So we were able to talk with Pastor Jay Cooper from Violet Crown Church in Austin, Texas, about what their congregation is up to in exploring AI and actually using an AI-generated service. So let's hear some of his thoughts. Pastor Jay Cooper has been playing around with artificial intelligence and its implications for the church community. And your context, Jay, is Violet Crown City Church in Austin, Texas. You've been doing a series, like sermon series, worship series with artificial intelligence. What inspired this series?
I think playing around with is an accurate term for us to get started this morning. As a someone who is trained in seminary and not beyond that, I think my experience is somewhat limited. However, the last month or so has been a crash course and a great learning experience for me. So what inspired this time together? We're doing a 3-week series on AI and God, exploring the nature of truth and what is sacred, the potential and the pitfalls of AI being used in a ministry setting. And so I got the idea maybe 6 months ago. We have some techie type software developers in the church, and I just like to pepper them with questions. And then seeing online kind of the proliferation of AI and just thinking, wow, this is going to really be part of every aspect of our life. And then naturally my mind goes to, what would it look like to use this in worship? You know, just your basic pastor thought on a Monday.
Right.
So,
how can this make my life easier? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I'll get into that in a little bit. I actually have strong feelings against using any form of AI going forward in sermon writing. Okay. However, to me, y'all, the church seems to be light years behind generally on issues like this. We react with fear, or we react with, that won't affect me. Like within these church walls, society should have a limited influence. Well, I could not disagree more. And so if there's an issue that's impacting the world, we really need to bring that into the church. I think it was Karl Barth who said back in the day, we need to preach with a Bible with one hand and a newspaper in the other. So let's update that to say a Bible in one hand and a smartphone in the other.
Yeah.
So there you go. Let's see what discussion we can start in the church and even take that step of what would it look like if we brought AI into worship leading? And then cue mushroom cloud.
Well, let's follow up with that then. So you did kind of an introduction on AI in one worship service, and then this past Sunday, so fresh we haven't seen the results yet, was the AI-led worship service. How did it go?
That's a great question. I'm still
long pause.
formulating the response in my mind. Okay, so the first few weeks of planning it were very fun. ChatGPT, create an entire worship service that includes children's message, call to worship, communion liturgy, sermon, an original song based on the sermon. And then, following up with some prompts on each of those. So very fun, great conversations with people in the church. And then we come to yesterday, service time, and we've got like a local news reporter there. We're doing interviews. The story's kind of gotten out on several local news outlets, and it's all kind of amped up, and we have a good number of visitors. And I tried to preface the service about what we're doing, but then just let AI take the lead. Every word that was said for the next 45 or so minutes was AI generated.
Wow.
And honestly, I started feeling more and more uncomfortable as the service went along. To pray, it started feeling more inauthentic, especially the sermon. And then my big worry, as people were, kind of giggling here and there and all that, is, oh God, am I making a mockery of Sunday morning worship? However, we had a big conversation as a church afterwards. We all gathered, and the response, that was not necessarily people's response. They thought it was a fantastic way to start a conversation about AI in the church. And they said, Jay, your job is safe. And which, would have been the mother of all regrets. My wife kind of casually mentioned, like, why would you, like, what if this is the Sunday they realize, wow, Jay's salary could be used for a lot of other things. But so a couple people I was shocked said they were able to worship. And a couple said they thought it was going to be a train wreck, and it was not. Mixed results. I would probably say I had the biggest evolution of this is going to be awesome to, okay, this is not something we'll be doing again. Now, I don't want to totally close myself off to what would AI look like in other ministry aspects, but Sunday morning worship is not one we'll continue with.
Were there any elements of worship that just really felt out of place? They were total splinters to the flow of the worship vibe. I don't know.
So ChatGPT is clearly very influenced by the prompts we give it. So I tried to do a prompt that was like, give us a traditional call to worship, a progressive communion liturgy, and I thought all that was very interesting. It responded well. The jokes were, so in ChatGPT's defense, I did say things like, work in some jokes to lighten the mood. The jokes, okay, this one joke I thought was actually legit. It said, I was having ChatGPT for the sermon do a self-critique. I said, generate a sermon about how do Christians identify and discern truth in a world where AI is blurring truth. So AI is kind of doing a self-critique, and one of the jokes it put out there was, like the old saying, don't trust everything you read on the internet, especially if it's in Comic Sans. And I thought that was actually a legit joke, and the congregation just groaned. So, and then there would be transitions like, but then in all seriousness, folks, almost like is this mic on, like stand-up comedian? So those felt a little jarring, and the sermon probably felt the most out of place because it was just your traditional 3-point sermon, information, and fairly dry. So that was the part where, obviously no personal examples, kind of lacking in soul, kind of the invitation or challenge.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you also did communion with the AI, because that for me, I don't know, doing communion with Skynet, no. What was that like?
My friend was like, you better wear galoshes because you are going to be struck down. That part, the liturgy was actually good and interesting. So we are open and affirming community of faith. So I said, write a progressive communion liturgy. And it said, this table is open to people of all ages, nations, sexual orientations. And I thought, all right, so this is a really beautiful understanding of inclusive grace. All are invited. So I thought, way to go, old chat buddy. You nailed this one. We did serve communion in the same way we always do. And so I think that felt familiar enough to people that it wasn't like I was dressed like in a robot outfit or something crazy like that. They just received. And so that was not as sacrilegious as I would expect.
Well, in all the research that you've been doing leading up to this series, what has been something that surprised you?
I think probably its ability to mimic human prayer. Now, it's still put in words like, we beseech thee. That's not a general part of my Sunday morning vocabulary. And it uses words that I generally are not part of my theology, like our final victory, and kind of, emphasis on sovereignty. So I guess the most surprising thing is AI is, from my understanding, just a reflection of humanity. And so it's scraping all of our biases, our prejudice, our faithfulness, our prayers that are a little messy. And so it knocked AI down from its pedestal, I would say, for me. It really, God, what a interesting and fascinating technology, but it's got a ways to go. And also, I guess another surprise is it does not come across as a Skynet type thing. It's more like a kind of a CP3O, kind of an annoying sidekick.
That is a fantastic analogy.
That speaks like an infinite number of languages. Although it should be noted that I did ask it to write a prayer in speaking in tongues, and it said it could not. That speaking in tongues is a deeply personal experience. So tried to bait it, but
yeah. Oh,
yeah.
That is a fascinating answer for an AI.
We couldn't possibly be the first ones that have done this. Have you heard of other churches that are experimenting?
There was a church in Germany that did an AI-led service as well. I think they kind of went through the similar process as you did with asking ChatGPT to generate the worship order, and I believe that the results were somewhat similar. That like they felt afterwards like we're not going to be replaced by the robots anytime soon. Yeah, there was just something missing there,
There was. And what our congregation members identified it as is they're just calling it the soul. And I think that's part of what I was trying to get at. I tried to make it very clear that this is not just like clickbait or some, cheesy, gimmicky event, but we're talking about the nature of what is sacred. Like, for instance, if if I pray for you both, it feels hopefully authentic and then it has soul. If AI generates a prayer for you, because it doesn't have soul, does that inauthenticate the prayer? Perhaps so. Maybe most people would just easily say, absolutely, that is a worthless prayer. I'm just trying to see how we can wrestle with those kind of questions.
Yeah. Well, so with that question in mind then, like, what have you learned about AI in the spiritual journey? Like, can it inform our spiritual journey? Have you found through this series that it has impacted the practice of your faith community?
That's a great question. I think my ready answer is no. It has not impacted them in a way that will affect their day-to-day spiritual practices. My hope is that it's planting seeds in me as well, that, okay, I took this time to try to experience something sacred in something that our assumption is has no sacred component at all. So then, what if I carry that forward, and in my workplace or anywhere else, am I then practicing looking for the sacred in a place I would never look for it before? Or in my neighbor who's wearing that red hat that makes me just like go bonkers in terms of politics, I would not expect, now this is just an example, of someone that I would have difficulty aligning with politically. But then, what if, okay, Jay, you assume you won't find the sacred in this conversation? Start looking for it. Don't limit God, because that's what I'm doing every time I make these assumptions.
We mentioned a strong warning about using AI in your sermon preparation. What did you want to unpack there?
Say that again, the strong...
Well, you had some strong thoughts about moving forward with AI in sermon preparation.
So, messiness is part of the human condition. And I really believe that needs to find its way into the sermon. So the sermon, more than anything, has to be a reflection of the pastor's inner wrestling and also knowing their congregation. Like when I'm preparing a message, I'm like, so-and-so is going through a divorce. God, they are shattered. So-and-so has just experienced this incredible breakthrough moment with God. Those things all need to work their way into the message. And I hope it's Spirit-led in a way that speaks to someone. And so I think through sermon prep, God is trying to do something in the pastor's life as a spiritual discipline. And I think the congregation needs to see that this is not polished, and the way the pastor prays is in a way that gives them permission. Oh, okay, I don't have to say it in an eloquent way. I can just pray. And so if I found out I were part of a service where this pastor had prepared an AI sermon, I would feel a little duped. And I could not, in my good integrity or trying to have good integrity, preach a sermon that is anyone else's, whether I find it online or whether I generate it by ChatGPT. So sometimes if I just can't come up with anything for Sunday and it's a terrible week and there was a funeral and everything, I just do my absolute best. But the thought of finding something online would be, I could not deliver that message.
Yeah. In our work, we hear a lot about communicating authenticity. And it sounds like this really leans into that it is better to be authentic than it is to be polished.
Right. I hope so. I hope so. Like would you say you've ever heard someone preach a sermon without naming names that you thought was maybe found elsewhere, so to speak?
Well, in a way that, I don't know. I've heard people drop anecdotes that are kind of, yeah. Those have been around the block a few times. Like, I've heard those, yeah. Yes. Yeah, and they can be a little disjointing in a way, yeah.
It can.
It was removed. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what the congregation responded, and I thought they shared some very kind words, that what was missing is that they appreciate that I let them into my heart, I share from my heart, and I try to ask some probing questions. And so both of those were missing from the service. And Michelle, as I was telling Ryan a minute ago, I think the big, before you popped in, the big take home is, I think, my job continues to be safe in such a way that I think maybe it was the best thing I could have done, and I'll receive a bump in salary this year because I think it was helpful to show that this is not where our congregation wants to go.
Yeah, and using the AI too, you can't control what theology they're pulling from. So that could get really messy and really tricky.
Yes, exactly. Although one guy in our congregation was like, geez, Jay, AI pulled more biblical references than you usually do in your sermons. And I was like, this is your last Sunday with us. Thanks for Oh, I should say that, when it ran on the local news, we were all kind of lamenting that it didn't have emotion to it, the AI. Someone, I don't know who it is, but they work with AI in ministry, emailed me and they said, here are the prompts you need to give it in order to bring out emotion in AI.
Okay.
So Ryan, I have not responded. I don't quite know. I don't know
Give
if I will
it a shot
respond
first, and then,
Right.
Well, we'll see. All right. Well, Pastor Jay, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us and for kind of giving us a proxied way to walk through this this experience. Right. So it's been fun to kind of watch and follow along, and others can too at your church's website, violetcrown.church.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoy y'all and appreciate your work.
So besides the human disconnect, there are also some ethical concerns that use of AI in a Christian context can bring up. My friend Nelson Musanda from the Dell Method blog, somebody who I've talked to on my other podcast, Pastoring in the Digital Parish, little cha-ching moment there. Bing, bing. And he wrote recently a blog post about using AI in a Christian context. And I thought it was really probably important of us to bring up some of the reservations that he expressed. One of them being that there's a fear that AI could replace jobs that people used to do, which is disconcerting from a justice aspect because it could lead to financial issues for people in places already struggling. That doesn't really fit with our Christian values of helping those in need.
We're worried that AI could make social inequalities and unfairness even worse. If the data used to teach AI programs is biased, then its decisions or predictions could also be biased. This means people might be treated differently just because of their race, gender, etc., which goes against our beliefs of fairness and justice.
Yeah, Pastor Jay brought up some of the ways that we can start to see this kind of infiltrate, because he talked about how the AI was presenting language that he generally wouldn't use.
Sorry, what was that?
It's okay.
My phone.
Oh, I'll backtrack on that. Pastor Jay brought up some instances where we can see how that might kind of infiltrate some of the ways that we use AI, because he had language that was presented within his worship service that he said he wouldn't normally use. So there are, if there are ideas out there that the AI is scraping predominantly, then it can start to bleed through in some of the information that we're projecting. Like I think about pronouns and God,
Yeah.
right? Most of our Christian literature uses the masculine pronoun for God. And yet, that's something that I've kind of moved away from. But, we can begin to see like how this starts to repeat itself in, exclusively using he and him for reference to God. So, yeah, and there are other ways. I mean, that's just an example of ways that we can see like how maybe thoughts that aren't based in justice or fairness can start to bleed into what AI is representing. And of course, a third concern is that AI could be misused, like creating weapons that can act independently or that can spy on people. And this can lead to harm and go against the Christian belief of treating people with respect and kindness, for sure.
AI is like a chainsaw. Sounds very aggressive.
It does.
It can clear out an area like a forest and make room for something new, like housing development. Tools can negatively affect people and the environment if you don't use them safely and responsibly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the warning that like part of the message is the tool that we need to be aware of. So all these come from Nelson Musanda's Dell Method blog, and we'll link to that article on the show notes.
The concerns in general for AI, not just in the church but outside too, like these AIs have a turn off button that these companies created, because we've already seen, I think it was Google's AI that got too smart, it freaked everybody out and they turned it off.
Yeah, was that the example that or was it one on Twitter where they had used an AI? Yeah. And then went off the rails into, I mean, it was like into racist territory, wasn't it? Where somebody had really kind of usurped its, and it needed to be pulled quickly. Yeah. Yeah. So we're not to the point yet, are we, where humans are superfluous. Okay. So we've kind of laid out the limitations of AI use in general, but specifically how it relates to our spiritual journeys. Michelle, moving forward, do you see some ways that AI might help influence your spiritual journey for the positive?
I don't want to cut it off completely. I'm thinking back of when, let's say maybe was it the 80s? I was born in the 90s, but from other stories I've heard, when televangelism became a thing.
Yeah.
Everybody would say like, oh, that's not a real way to have church or experience spirituality. I don't want to be a boomer in that sense. I want to keep an open mind, but being careful and like these warnings that we just went through, knowing the limitations right now.
Yeah. I want to note that anytime new technology has been introduced, there's been that kind of kickback. So like even when they started translating the Bible into vernacular languages, people were like, wow, this is, what are we going to need priests and pastors for if everybody can read the Bible and that kind of stuff. So, in the same way, and of course those roles are still prevalent, still here. And even with AI, I think AI can be useful as like a reference, but it is not a formative thing. So I've found it particularly useful in work when I want to learn how to better communicate with the machines, right? So there are certain parts of our lives that are driven by machine learning, specifically when we're talking about like search engine optimization and getting things noticed on social media. Like AI can be really useful in telling me how to communicate with that. It can also be useful in just quickly sharing various ideas. So if I want to ask it a specific question, like, tell me about John Wesley's thoughts on prevenient grace, it can distill that pretty quickly. It may not always be authoritative, but it's a jumping off point, right? So I don't know. In a way, it's like the old-fashioned encyclopedia, just in a more interactive sense, where you can ask it follow-up questions. It can be really cool and useful. I would love to see a way of developing AI that helps engage us in a spiritual practice around a specific felt need. So, I have periods of anxiety. Like, can an AI app give me times to pray? Can it maybe interface with my watch to tell when my heartbeat goes up, and then give me a little kick notification that says, "Hey, take a moment for mindfulness right now." That'd be really cool. Or giving me some scripture references for times like that. That would be some useful.
Really realistic, useful thing. Like, if that doesn't exist already, I bet in the next few years it will.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that get me excited about, like, drawing AI into use for spiritual practice, but also with the caveat of all the things that we've brought up here that, there are parts where it's just inauthentic, or where some of the information that it represents is not accurate at all. I've asked it a number of times to pull quotes together for me. And I found in all those cases that those quotes cannot be contributed or directly attributed to the people who the AI says has said them. So, yeah. Which may be the case with some of these Jesus apps as well. So just that caveat there. And always be mindful of the context that it comes out of. So even when it's quoting scripture, that sounds great. Sometimes it may not be like the full context of scripture. So cool. Well, Michelle, any final thoughts?
No final thoughts other than this is not Skynet. I joke about it, but obviously we've all had that fear instilled in us from pop culture.
Totally. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this spiritual journey into artificial intelligence and how it relates to bringing the divine into the everyday. I just brought up prevenient grace, and this is the kind of grace that's present in our lives before we're cognitively aware of it. And I feel like AI is such a platform for exploring prevenient grace, because even in the quotes from the Ask Jesus that we've represented, it feels like there is a way that grace is being communicated in those spaces. The AI is not aware of it. It's just parroting back things that have already been written by human beings. But grace is active in our lives as well. So I hope that you're able to find that grace active in your life through the coming weeks. And Michelle and I will be back with another new episode of the Compass Podcast in a couple weeks. In the meantime, peace to you.
Goodbye.